No one should like the X700 is something I will never say. The X700 is a perennial favorite and with lots of good reasons. It's not the flashiest camera, it's entirely nondescript. It typifies safe, bland, boring 80s design style. It lacks any sort of stylistic risk, but it handles really well. It's fairly pedestrian, but it's an excellent workhorse. It's not perfect, but in terms of reliable bodies with good interfaces and a great supporting lens system, the X700 is a top-notch choice. No, it's not perfect, but it's fantastic. The X700 found its market and was one of only a few cameras successful enough to make almost 2 decades in production. Released in 1981 with production likely beginning in 1980, the X700 ended production in either 1999 or 2000. So in terms of comparable advanced level cameras, the X700 is easily the most plentiful and, for that, the least expensive. Minolta released the X700 as a panacea to all that ailed the photographic market. It sought to be a camera solution for any photographer of any skill level and proceeded to succeed at being just that. Minolta took no risks with the X700 and also engineered high-cost items out of the design. This resulted in a generic-looking, affordable, and entirely likable camera that appealed to everyone. The X700 has a nice, simple interface, good usability options, and the Rokkor lenses, especially the Rokkor X lineup, were spectacular, though admittedly the Rokkor lens lineage of incremental upgrades over time is confusing and convoluted through the fog of history. Now the X700 has a good, reliable, and accurate center-weighted meter that delivers very accurate exposures. Coupled with an aperture priority mode, this camera is ready to shoot instantly when needed. In program mode, the X700 is the best manual focus point-and-shoot camera ever made. But it has some flaws. The viewfinder does not display the selected shutter speed in full manual mode, only the recommended one, and for most shooters that's not an issue, but advanced shooters who like manual mode will likely tire quickly of taking the camera away from their eyes to check the shutter speed. Now for that reason alone, I think the X570 is a better option for most manual mode shooters. The X700 also was made of a lot of plastic. Now this kept it light, but don't drop it. And Minolta also used a lot of inexpensive electronics to keep the costs down. A bit more than a third of the X700s I've seen have had dead or faulty electronics. However, most of the problem X700s I've seen have been later models, so if you can find one on it that says Japan instead of China or nothing, you'll be better in the long run. The flash sync at 1/60th is kinda wimpy compared to other contemporary cameras, and that's because Minolta went with a cheaper cloth shutter instead of a more expensive metal leaf option. But for most of the target market, that was a non-issue. And honestly, a fast flash sync is probably the most overrated camera spec on the sheet. Yes, it's nice to have and all, but in 30 years of photography, I can count the number of times I've needed a flash sync faster than 1/60th on one hand with no fingers extended. But the shutter is electronic, which means this camera will not work without batteries. That makes the X700 a bad choice for astrophotography and other long exposure imaging, as dead batteries will end your shot early. You will also want to keep a spare set of batteries on you if you take the X700 out a lot. The X700 has... what the? Now wait, that's not fair. I don't wear flannel or jeans. Wait, that's not... well, okay, that's not so far off. Where was I? Oh yeah, so the X700 has a lot going for it, and the issues I noted are inconsequential. The X700 has a great layout, easy to operate shutter speed dial, spectacular viewfinder, stunning meter, and an interface that will take a novice or a professional about 1 day to learn. If you want this as your first camera, good choice. If you want this as a camera you can pack and carry all day, good choice. If you want this as a camera you can hammer steel on, bad choice. but for everything photographic, this is a nice, ergonomically sound and reliable camera. And the X700 is just a lot of fun to use. I've used the X700 off and on for 2 years, and every time I use it, I really like it. And the results it's given me have been, in general, good. And it's light enough that it's not hard to carry for day-long hikes or walks around the city. So what is the X700 good for? Well, most things. Street photography, definitely. Studio work, for sure. Landscapes, yes. Microscopy and extreme macros, without a doubt. With the exceptions of ultra-long duration shots and flash work in very bright settings, the X700 is ready to do whatever you need it to. So tell me that the X700 is your favorite camera. I say good choice. It's definitely the best Minolta Rokkor-mount camera, and probably the second or third best Minolta that was ever made. Until Minolta released the 9XI, no suitable heir to the X700 manifested, and that's understandable. Very few other cameras could fill the X700's shoes.